Hello, Urbana. I had a short-lived political career. When I was in the 5th grade, I ran for student council president. And in the end, I fell just short of victory, but I'd like to think that I came across well to the voters. I spoke passionately to Miss Clark's homeroom class, shook hands in the hallways, and made campaign posters with puns that sounded really funny at the time. I ran what you might call a winsome campaign. Like 5th grade me, many Christians today talk about the importance of being winsome. Some say we should have a winsome witness. And there's nothing terribly wrong with this idea, and if the alternative is mean-spirited, narcissistic, and out of touch, then let's stick with winsome. But I think we can do better. The risk with winsome is that it sounds a little too close to charm, the theological equivalent of vote for me. It suggests that we might have something about us that people will like, and the gospel is ultimately less about us and our own likability than it is about the Creator to whom we point. So instead of winsomeness, let me suggest a different approach, one that blends confidence with compassion. We can be confident in our faith and compassionate toward those who are different than us. If you're sad about losing the alliteration of winsome witness, you can call it compassionate confidence. When I speak of confidence, I do not mean certainty. I don't think that faith means certainty. You have believed because you have seen me, Jesus says to Thomas after the resurrection. But blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed. Faith without certainty is how we live in the world. As New Testament scholar Kevin Rowe observes in his book, One True Life, the human condition is such that you have to choose how to live from among options that rule one another out. And we make our choice trusting in things unseen. We wager our lives one way or the other. Every one of us, whether religious or not, lives and acts on this kind of faith. And this gives us an entry to compassion. Whatever our differences, we all share the very human condition of living and acting in faith. The Christian faith is also a confident faith. We are confident in the Word of God and in the witness of those who have gone before us. We are confident that this world is not as it should be, and that there will be a day when there is no more death or mourning or crying or pain. We are confident in the revelation of Jesus Christ. And it is because of this confidence that we can show compassion. Showing compassion means that we risk something of ourselves. It means that we look for common ground with other people who are not like us. We've heard this week and seen examples of people finding common ground in coffee shops, on airplanes, in classrooms. And we pursue people knowing that they might hurt or disappoint us. Leslie Newbigin puts this well in a wonderful little book called Proper Confidence. Newbigin writes, personal knowledge of other people is impossible without risk. It cannot begin without an act of trust, and trust can be betrayed. Despite these risks, Christians can take the lead in pursuing common ground because our confidence lies ultimately in the gospel, in the Messiah. We can enter into unknown spaces and untested partnerships, realizing that trusting others is risky, but that we ultimately trust a God who is the faithful witness. How do we embody this blend of confidence and compassion? Let me suggest 3 postures: tolerance, humility, and patience. And let me start with humility. Humility means knowing that when it comes to some of our most deeply held beliefs, we will not always be able to prove to other people who think differently why we are right and they are wrong. This does not shake our confidence in our beliefs, but it calls for a recognition that some of our beliefs stem from contested premises that others do not share. Humility is not relativism. Let me give you an example. I was recently in a discussion with an atheist friend of mine who seemed to relish in all of our differences. He thought it was a great thing that I liked Duke basketball, and he cheered for lesser teams. That I liked mint chocolate chip ice cream and he liked vanilla. That I believe in God and he does not. All of these things made the world more interesting to him. But his dismissal of God stopped me. Not all differences are good, I told him. We can disagree about ice cream flavors and sports teams, but Christians do not celebrate all differences about ultimate things. Humility can lead to greater empathy, but the goal is not to minimize the reality of our differences. The second posture is patience. Patience requires listening well and sticking with hard relationships. It does not mean blanket acceptance, and in fact, it might turn out that my patient listening to you leads me to conclude that you were just as wrong as I thought you were. But we can at least assume a posture that moves beyond dismissing others before we even hear what they have to say. Patience means taking the time to learn something about the people around you. People are complicated and frustrating and wonderful, but you will only discover this with patience. And with enough patience, you will find that other people, God's image bearers, almost always have something to teach you. The final posture is tolerance. Tolerance is the idea that we allow for others to pursue their own beliefs and practices, even those we find objectionable. This is not the same as approval. And parsing the difference between tolerance and approval requires the hard work of distinguishing between people and ideas. Tolerance asks that we treat people with respect. It does not mean we respect all ideas. Think for a minute about how these postures of humility, patience, and tolerance fit together with one another. At the beginning of Revelation, we see the phrase patient endurance 5 different times. We endure hardships, but we also endure differences that make us uncomfortable. So in some ways, our tolerance is facilitated by our patience. And perhaps the posture of humility reinforces our patient endurance of those with whom we disagree by reminding us of our shared humanity and mutual dependence on one another. Most of us are not naturally humble, patient, and tolerant. We have to practice these postures. I'm a pretty snarky person by nature. I honed my sarcasm in middle school, and I perfected it in college. In some ways, social media was made for me. But I've been talking these last few years about humility, patience, and tolerance, and so Twitter success would not go very well with my argument. So I try to exercise care. I usually keep my tweets to boring expressions like, hey, here's a nice article, or congratulations on the new job. I'm not saying I'm perfect on Twitter. I occasionally let one slip. But I also write lots of tweets that I do not send. I have a private file of really clever tweets that will never see the light of day. You can do this too, with your tweets and your texts and your Instagram posts. It's a small step, but a first step. And if you accept my challenge to embrace both confidence and compassion, it might be a necessary step. Another way to pursue both confidence and compassion is by connecting with others in more tangible and more vulnerable ways. That starts with very ordinary acts like sharing a meal or simply having a conversation. Sometimes it means focusing on common interests before you delve into those painful disagreements. My atheist friend and I both care about good writing, criminal justice reform, and cheap breakfasts. And we know these things about each other because even though we eventually arrived at our differences, we did not begin with them. You can start to find common ground with ordinary acts in your local context. Think back to Renee's story that we heard of the theater performance of artists in Rome that began with ordinary friendships and led to life-changing encounters with Jesus. And as you think this week about what it means to be incarnational in global missions, don't miss the call to be incarnational in your own neighborhood. What are the challenges and opportunities presented by the differences you have with your neighbors? Do you know them well enough to know their challenges? Those of you who are students, faculty, or campus ministers will find part of your local context defined by your particular school environment. I teach just a few miles away from this dome at Washington University in St. Louis. Part of my local context is knowing that we are also Washington University near Ferguson. And Washington University near Ferguson is linked to ongoing struggles of racial inequity and structural injustice, struggles that will only be addressed if people can begin to work across differences, black and white, city and county, Democrat and Republican, Christian and non-Christian. Knowing my local context means knowing the realities of the differences around me and asking how I might be called to work with those differences. Every one of us has local struggles that cry out for creative partnerships across the differences that divide us. One of the best illustrations I've seen of these ideas comes from, of all places, a beer commercial. And I'm going to hazard a guess that I'm the first speaker in the history of Urbana to quote from a beer commercial. This one begins by introducing pairs of strangers who the audience soon learns holds vastly different beliefs about really important matters. The strangers, however, are unaware initially of these differences. They spend some time getting to know each other in casual conversation, and then they're asked to tackle a problem together, in this case, constructing a wooden bar on which to serve beer. And then comes the critical moment, as the strangers in front of one another are shown videos of each other expressing their unfiltered and uncharitable views toward the other side. We, the audience, watch as they squirm awkwardly during this scene, and we realize the fragility of their common ground. At the end of the videos, a voice fills the room. You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer. We think to ourselves, this is not going to end well, and there are dramatic pauses. And then, against all odds, the unlikely pairings stay to talk to one another. It's a lovely example of what is possible when we start with empathy and common ground. And here's the thing, it's a beer commercial. We have the gospel. With the gospel, we can move toward humility, patience, and tolerance because we are motivated by faith, hope, and love. We can assume a posture of humility because we place our faith in the faithful witness. We can have patience in the world because our hope is in things to come. And as we are reminded all this week in our study of Revelation, in things that have already happened. And we can pursue tolerance because we are motivated by the love of Jesus. On second thought, the love of Jesus allows us to pursue something far more radical than tolerance, doesn't it? You and I just don't tolerate the people we love. We laugh with them and cry with them, celebrate and mourn with them. We risk the kind of personal investment that requires more than just coexistence. And what about when people reject us or are hostile to us? Jesus doesn't tell us to tolerate our enemies. He commands us to love them. And thank God that he does not merely tolerate us. He embraces us across the greatest difference of all. Christians should be leading the way of engaging with confidence and compassion because we are called to embody the love of Jesus that he has shown to us. We are called to go into those uncertain and messy spaces across the globe, and for many of us, across the streets. Your mission field today may be your lab, your sorority, or your study group. It may be the club or team that you join that puts you in relationship with people who do not share your beliefs and whose life choices differ from your own. That means taking risks and stepping outside of comfortable relationships. Some people may cast aspersions on you for the company you keep or the places you go. They did that to Jesus too. As Christians, we can be confident without sacrificing compassion, and compassionate without surrendering our confidence in the faithful witness. And so, Urbana, let us be people who speak and act in the world with humility, patience, and tolerance, because our thoughts, our actions, and our lives are characterized by faith, hope, and love.